The Krivox detention facility had held thousands of prisoners across hundreds of species. Its warden, a cold-blooded Saurian named Drask, had seen every type of captive reaction: rage, fear, defiance, despair. But the human female in cell 47 confused him. Lieutenant Rebecca Beck Morrison had been crying for 3 days straight. "The human continues its emotional display," reported Guard Vec, his mandibles clicking with disdain. "Weak species. It breaks quickly," Drask observed through the monitoring screen. The human sat curled against the wall, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Her crew had been killed when their exploration vessel was captured. She was alone, light years from Earth, imprisoned by a regime that viewed humans as soft, emotional creatures unfit for the harsh realities of galactic conflict. "Keep monitoring," Drask ordered. "Emotional species are unpredictable." But as days passed and the crying continued, even that concern faded. The guards began ignoring cell 47 entirely. The human was broken, they decided. No threat. Just another casualty of war. On the 7th day, the crying stopped. Guard Vec noticed it during his rounds. Cell 47 was silent. The human sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. Her face, previously red and swollen, had become eerily calm. "The human has ceased its distress vocalizations," Vec reported. Finally, Drask muttered. "Probably accepted its fate. They couldn't have been more wrong." Beck opened her eyes. The tears were gone, replaced by something the Krivox had never seen in a human before: cold, calculated focus. She had cried for her fallen crew, mourned them properly as they deserved. Now it was time to work. Humans, Beck knew, had a unique trait among galactic species. They could partition their emotions, feel them fully, then set them aside to operate with pure logic. Her instructors at Earth Defense Academy called it compartmentalization. Her grandmother called it getting your shit together after a good cry. Beck studied her cell with fresh eyes. The Krivox had assumed emotional meant stupid. Their first mistake. The energy barrier had a 0.2-second flicker during guard rotations. She'd timed it while pretending to sob. The ventilation system cycled every 6 hours, and the air pressure differential suggested the ducts were large enough for human passage. The guard Vec had an injured left leg that affected his response time. She'd noticed his limp through her tears. For 2 more days, Beck remained silent and compliant. The guards relaxed further. Their second mistake. On the 9th night, Beck made her move during the guard rotation. As the barrier flickered, she jammed the food tray's metal edge into the emitter port, a technique impossible for species with rigid appendages, but human fingers were remarkably dexterous. The barrier failed. Alarms should have triggered, but Beck had spent the previous day's meal period wedging bits of food into the sensor array. The Krivox had built their systems assuming prisoners would be too afraid or broken to act. Their third mistake. Vec entered the cell to investigate. He never saw Beck behind the door. Her elbow strike, delivered with Earth's heavy gravity training, dropped him instantly. She took his access card and weapon, then disappeared into the ventilation system. Drask discovered the breach 20 minutes later. Impossible. The human was emotionally compromised. "Sir," his lieutenant trembled, "we've lost contact with sections 4 through 9. The human has released 83 prisoners and armed them with guard weapons. She's systematically disabling our security infrastructure." "One human?" "Sir, she left a message on the command console." Drask read the text in broken Krivoxian, clearly translated by a stolen device. "You mistook grief for weakness. You thought crying meant breaking. You forgot that humans mourn their dead, then they avenge them. You should have killed me when I was crying. Now I'm done crying." The facility descended into chaos. Beck moved through corridors like a phantom, using skills that 3 days of tears had convinced the Kryvox she didn't possess. She was a trained military officer, special operations qualified, survivor of Earth's brutal selection programs. The tears had been real, humans felt deeply. But feeling deeply didn't mean helpless. It meant motivated. By dawn, Beck had commandeered the detention facility's command center. The freed prisoners had overwhelmed the guards. Drask found himself on his knees, surrounded by those he had considered weak. Beck stood before him, weapon trained steady. Her eyes were dry now, hard as Earth's diamonds. "You made assumptions," she said quietly. "You thought emotional meant fragile. You confused compassion with cowardice. You saw tears and assumed defeat." Drask's voice cracked. "What are you?" "Human," Beck replied. "We cry for our dead because we loved them. We feel grief because we're capable of deep bonds. And when we're done mourning?" She leaned closer. "We remember we're also the species that hunted megafauna to extinction, survived ice ages, and clawed our way to the top of our planet's food chain despite being slower and weaker than everything trying to eat us." She straightened. "You let me cry in that cell. You got comfortable with my grief. That was your fatal error. You forgot what happens when a human stops crying and starts thinking." As Kryvox reinforcements arrived to find their facility captured, Beck transmitted coordinates to the nearest Earth fleet. Rescue would come. Justice would follow. Drask understood too late, human tears weren't weakness. They were the storm before the calm. They were the grief that preceded the reckoning. The galaxy would learn what Earth had always known: the most dangerous human isn't the one who never cries. It's the one who cries, then gets back up. Because when a human stops crying, that's when the real work begins.